Attention please. This upload is only for educational purpose. No intention to infringe copyrights. Learning English with subtitles. GPITRAL. GPITRAL. Definitely a must-see. Follow us.
It's 20 years since the House of Horrors began to give up its buried secrets. When the grim truth about life inside 25 Cromwell Street started to unravel. And this happy, smiling couple, Fred and Rose West, were revealed as the most prolific and depraved sex killers in British criminal history. But today, questions remain, not least, how many others did they kill?
Up until 1994, I had a sense that there was limits to what human beings could do to each other.
This isn't just a killing in the sense that you've shot somebody or stabbed somebody. This is torture.
He told me he'd already killed hundreds of girls and buried them under the paving stones of Gloucester.
Rose West is now 60 and is serving a whole life sentence in prison. She told her lawyer she is content to stay there until she dies. Her husband Fred is long gone. An odd job man and petty thief, he beguiled many with his sparkling eyes and easy charm. He hanged himself in jail a year after his arrest. Their old home has vanished, replaced with a landscaped open space that provides a walk-through towards the city centre. There is no memorial to those who died there. The police investigation identified the remains of 12 victims. The horrors of 25 Cromwell Street dated back to 1973. Just a year after Fred and Rose moved in. Almost all the victims had been gagged and sexually tortured before their bodies were dismembered. "19-year-old Linda Goff was the earliest victim buried here, under the bathroom floor. She had been befriended by the Wests and, like several victims, helped to care for their children. Also in 1973, Carol Ann Cooper was buried here beneath the cellar floor. She was 15. She was living in a children's home in Worcester when she disappeared after getting off a bus. At Christmas that year, Lucy Partington was buried under this alcove. She was a 21-year-old student, last seen waiting at a bus stop after visiting friends in Cheltenham. The body of 15-year-old Shirley Hubbard was found here. She vanished in 1974. She had just left a shop in Worcester where she was doing work experience. Therese Siegenthaler was hitchhiking from London to Ireland, but she never got there. Her journey ended here, under the cellar floor. Juanita Mott was 18 and a lodger at Cromwell Street. She vanished from a bus stop outside Gloucester in 1975. There was a 3-year gap until 1978. Then 17-year-old Shirley Robinson was buried near the back door, along with her unborn baby by Fred. A year later, Alison Chambers, a runaway from a children's home, was buried in the garden. She was 17. Another gap followed, this time 8 years, before the body of Fred and Rose's daughter Heather was buried at the bottom of the garden. She was 16. At the West's previous Gloucester home, police found the remains of 8-year-old Charmaine West, the daughter of Fred's first wife Rena. She was murdered by Rose in 1972, while Fred was in prison. Rena's body was buried in a field near the Herefordshire border. So too were the remains of Fred's lover, Anne McFall, who was pregnant with his baby. After Fred's suicide, Rose West stood trial alone at Winchester Crown Court. She was convicted of all the murder charges she denied. That, effectively, was the end of the police investigation. But should the police have continued to investigate? Could they have carried on looking for more bodies?
I think Fred continued beyond the period covered by the official investigation. That is, if nothing else, based on common sense and experience as a criminal practitioner over decades. You don't just stop one Friday and say, well, I think I'll take up golf. You carry on because you're driven by lust and evil and whatever else turns you on that drives you to do this.
If you look at that pattern of offending from 72 through to their arrest in 94, there are significant gaps there. Now, what, do you think do we think they stopped? I don't know.
Fred West's story starts here, in the remote village of Muchmarcle, 16 miles from Gloucester. The son of a farm labourer, he knew these fields well and later used that knowledge to hide his victims. He became a jobbing builder, but in 1961 he appeared in court after getting a local 13-year-old pregnant.
I could see that Fred would be very popular as a jobbing builder. Hail fellow, well met type, country bumpkin type, very personable. And he would have been a bit of a looker in his youth, a bit of a charmer with the ladies, and very easy for people to get on with.
It was in Muchmarcle that Fred met his first wife, a Scottish teenager named Rena Costello, and they moved to Scotland. Questions remain over whether Fred started killing here.
We know he lived in Glasgow, we know he had this allotment on some waste ground, and we know that in conversation with the police and with friends and family like his son Steve, that he talked about his Scottish connection. I think that was Fred's phrase. And he inferred darkly that, in fact, there were victims in Glasgow whom he'd murdered and buried, as he did in Gloucester.
Fred and Rena first moved to Coatbridge. Nearby lived two notorious and now dead paedophiles. One was a church elder, a man called James Gologly. The other was convicted child rapist Alexander Gartshaw. Only a few weeks ago, Scottish prosecutors named him as a child killer. He befriended Fred West, according to Gartshaw's daughter, who has investigated her father's paedophile connections.
My dad would be 10 years older than Jimmy Gologly. Fred West would be younger than Jimmy Gologly. But my mother never understood what the friendship was about. I have no idea how paedophiles in those days would have found each other. It's very clear that now the internet plays a big part in that.
More evidence of Fred West's Scottish crime links emerged from Peterhead prison 4 years after his suicide. In a deathbed confession from his cell, James Gologly allegedly named Fred as part of a 1960s paedophile ring which preyed on girls from a troubled background.
I think this gang preyed on that type of child, knowing that questions would not be asked.
Did you see Fred West's name in the extracts?
Yes, I did.
Fred West later moved to Glasgow. A motorway interchange has long since obliterated his old home and the allotment he tended.
When one looked at the time Fred was in Glasgow, and if you go through the files of missing persons, I recall there were at least 4 girls of the type whom he later abducted and murdered, who went missing whilst he was in Glasgow.
In 1965, Fred left Glasgow in a hurry after knocking down and killing a young boy.
His job in Glasgow was to drive an ice cream van, and there was this extraordinary story that he ran down and killed a child with this van, which there was much talk about that, and indeed that would be perhaps his first victim if that was true.
Fred and Rena's violent on-off relationship came to a head when she joined him in Gloucestershire and found him living with a pregnant Anne McFall. By July 1967, Fred had killed Anne, and during this time 8 violent sex attacks were committed on young women in the area. But there are other unanswered questions from these early days.
There was other evidence in the unused material about a young teenage boy who was found hung in a barn out several miles out of Gloucester. There was some connection with Fred West, but they couldn't work out. Apparently there was some pornography on the floor, and this boy was hung from one of the rafters, but they couldn't work out how on earth he could have done it on his own.
All the evidence points to Fred's killing career starting years before he met Rose.
She was about 13 or 14 when she first met Fred. He'd already killed Anna McFall, at least, if not more. There was the discussion of a folie à deux, as though they both egged each other on, but I always thought whatever happened was Rose becoming embroiled in this weird figment of Fred's imagination that disastrously had the opportunity to manifest itself in the physical destruction of innocent young women.
A year after the murder of Anne McFall, on a dark November evening, teenager Mary Bastholm vanished from a bus stop in Gloucester. Her disappearance remains one of the key mysteries of the West case.
We still don't really know what's happened to her, but we can only imagine what's happened. But where is she? Where, assuming she is dead, which we, where is she? Where are her remains?